are MythVision.
Did you read that? Did you read that paper? It was a friend of mine. He's not a scholar, by the way. He's just a independent research guy, and he came to a conclusion where he thought Paul looked highly suspicious as a rewrite of something like false prophet in the Old Testament kind of stuff.
I did read it, yes, and it was very plausible.
You never know.
It struck me the writer was himself coming from a Christian perspective, like a struggling Christian. Put it that way. Am I right?
Yeah, he was. He's an atheist now. He still believes. Yeah, he still believes that Paul is kind of like he looks at Jesus and sees Jesus as a celestial, not the same way that like Richard Carrier, so to speak, more like astrotheology. He thinks that it's an allegory, it's mythology, and whoever takes this crap literal, they're missing the point. And Paul himself, he says, is also myth. It's a rewrite of Old Testament characters. Every person in the New Testament is just a copy or a made-up story based off Old Testament characters, and the Old Testament characters are based off of, the sun or the moon or the something.
And so it goes on. Yeah, I hope you press the recall button.
I am. Let me get it started. Yeah. You want me to just go ahead and get it started?
We've started already, but yeah. I mean, there is a very plausible argument that would appeal to any rationalist. If you come from a faith position, your vision is clouded, of course, all from the beginning. But it makes perfect and obvious sense from a rational point of view that not only are the stories second, third, fourth hand, but it is all allegory, trying to make a different theological point, and yet you can say, for the simple-minded, you have to make the story, give it a human element, then they can relate to it. It's a bit like having a romantic subplot in a story about Stalingrad. If you just showed Stalingrad, people, it's too much. But if you show a romance within that, they can relate to the story.
So Paul is, he's our target today. And I figured, you've actually told us on the last show, you've traveled a lot of the places they claim a historical Paul traveled. This guy had to be buku's rich to be able to do the things he's claimed to do. I'm just going to leave it up to you. You're the scholar. I truly, first of all, want to say thank you for coming back on the show. And I really want to say thank you for all your work. And anyone who's watching right now, I am omnipresent for the next 5 minutes. So if you don't subscribe to his channel, and if you don't go and get his book, okay, Jesus Never Existed, and check out his materials, I might end up causing the plagues of Egypt to fall upon you. Just saying, okay? And nonetheless, if you're not a fan of Kenneth Humphrey, you're not human. So just go back to Mars. I'm a huge fan of this guy, and I really appreciate this. For our new audience who's never heard of you, they're going to really love your voice if they don't agree with your ideas. That's fine. They're going to love your voice. That's all that matters.
I'll just start talking then. What I'm going to say. Yeah, I mean, Paul is in many ways the main man. I mean, you could say that the New Testament is essentially about Paul. It's more about Paul than it is about Jesus. And Paul's sort of either his writings or what's written about him fills up more of that material than that little fairy tale about Jesus, So yeah, we should look at him. And yes, okay, you say about following his trips. I have, for many years now. I haven't completed the whole circuit because it's just not possible in terms of danger zones and the rest of it. But insofar as that area is accessible, yeah, I've been there and I've really enjoyed it. I mean, you do. Whether it's the claims made about Paul being there, whether they're fictitious or not, the places themselves are fascinating. I mean, there is a history there, and that I've enjoyed. But it does give, when you visit a place like Philippi or Corinth or any of the other places, you get some feel. You just get a feel for that particular time and place. And then you can set against it. You take a city like Ephesus. You go to Ephesus, right? Very impressive city, a major city of the Roman Empire. And then you try and think, one day Paul came here and it caused a riot. The whole city was taken up, infuriated by this man, and he had to run away and the rest of it. And you think, I don't think that is possible. You come out of the harbour area, you see the great, theatre area. You wander up one street after another, the various temples and what have you. As a city of perhaps, 250,000 people, and some Jewish guy comes into town and says, I know the truth and you're all wrong. I mean, can you really imagine that they would have given him the time of day? I mean, that's what you get if you visit these places. You get a real feel for where this story is coming from.
I have a hard time buying it. I really do. I love what you're doing there because the more I'm studying about pagan parallels and stuff, and we just did a show with Dr. Robert McNair Price, and he did like a pagan parallel one, and it just, it's like, so how really crazy would this idea be when they had all these gods already that looked very much like this in similar ways? It's not like they'd blow their gasket and go, let's kill this guy. It's like, dude, you're just bringing another freaking guy like we already have. What's so special? It's not like they're going to freak out. But I wanted to delve into some issues, and things that you have found about Paul. One of the things about your YouTube channel that I love is that you have these episodes where like, this is fraud. Look, it's obvious forgery. It's obvious lie. It's obvious. And I want to catch Paul red-handed. I mean, he claimed to be not a liar over and over and over. And well, that means he's not a liar, right?
Spoiler alert. Yeah, not a liar. Yeah. He does, yeah. I try and give Paul, if you like, a reasonable space to make, or the Christians writing about him, give him a reasonable point to say, okay, let's see if we can go with that. But the tales become so extraordinary that you only have to run by. Hang on. Like they stoned him at Demra or somewhere where he, or Perge was it? They stoned him, but yet the next day he got up and he went off more missionary work. And you think, well, that doesn't sound like a real person who's stoned to the extent that they thought he was dead. He must have been seriously hurt, and yet brushes himself, off he goes. And you think, this is stretching plausibility just too far. It easily goes into the miraculous. And when you not only see that in one story, but in every story, the whole bunch of these stories, it adds up to, they're not talking about a real person. They're talking about a superlative apostle, someone who ticks all the boxes of what he should be, of what a church trying to give itself some sort of justification in the 2nd century wants to tell people of how they got to where they were. They're not going to say this is a new racket we've just set up in the last few years, buy this product. No, they're trying to establish a legitimacy. And I think they hang that on this guy called Paul, right? They hang it on Paul. So he does the whole bit for them. The 12 disciples, well, gosh, they don't get a look in much, do we? We can't follow the perambulations of them around the world. They go off all these to Persia, Afghanistan, and everywhere else where you can't follow it at all. They get forgotten. It's all about Paul, and he writes theology. He founds churches. He takes the faith to Europe. and then he takes it to Rome, and of course then he has the big finish, the martyrdom. It's the whole thing is just too much to be believable.
You said that in a way. And look, I'm not like I've well read. Okay, I'm just a host of a show. I do read. I just not well read. Like I don't have a lot of books under my belt. And the way that you just said that was very unique. I'm glad that we made this about this show because I've never thought of it that way. You know, you always hear scholars get hung up on 7 authentic and this ridiculous, like, I think that Christianity's ideas rub off a lot on some of the scholarship. And I love what you said there. So for our audience, correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying what we have is a way of making one character carry all the weight of what the church went through when it started changing ideas, heading towards a Pauline type of thought process. So it really wasn't a guy. This is kind of like this movement and how this movement became, in a sense.
Yeah, that's entirely. Now, was there an initial Paul character behind it all? Oh, no, that's an interesting point. I mean, when I wrote my book, which was some years ago now, I didn't come out and say Paul's as fabricated as Jesus. I didn't want to say that because I thought, oh, come on, it's easy for someone in the 21st century to say they didn't exist, this didn't exist. There were, it's sort of denial. It's sort of, it just sounds so negative. It sounds so unscholarly. But so I was reluctant to go down that route. And even now, I will concede there may have been someone, and there may have been someone even with the name Paul, although, that's questionable. But what sort of person and how important was he, Now, I think that in that era, the world was awash with charlatans, or if you prefer, holy men, right? It was awash with them. The Roman Empire had integrated, a vast number of mini cultures with all with their own localized gods, and everyone was in there pitching. And these religions that were coming together in a more global or pan-Roman existence, they were competing with each other. So they stole ideas from each other. They borrowed ideas that worked and dropped the ones that didn't work. Even within Christianity, there were many variants. There was no one unified church until it was imposed upon. There were many competing churches, and so you've got a situation where a character perhaps. He started, with the idea of maybe he was a very successful spiritual character or holy man or quack or fraudster. Whatever he was, right, he was successful. Yeah. It sort of, and you can imagine, well, how could he be successful? Well, you only have to take some examples from your own American background there of the evangelical Christianity, where you've had scams. Some of them have been shown in movies where wired up. A preacher identifies somebody who's suffering, and he gives them the formula. Hallelujah! They can walk. They've solved a particular ailment, and then they pass the plate round, and all the dollars go into it. I mean, yes. So it's a successful business scam or holy work, and Paul could have been such a character. Everybody was very suspicious in that age, and it was sincerely felt that it was possible to foresee the future. That's why it became, a very restricted profession, because if someone foresaw the future of an emperor, and it wasn't a good future, that he would be dead soon, he was liable to be executed for making for that sort of dabbling in magic works. So there was a strong belief in that sort of prophecy stuff, and you can see how experience of people today, they still check their stars, their horoscopes. It's easy enough. People will always be intrigued to know, well, you'll have a good day tomorrow, or you're going to come into money this week. People were interested in that stuff. Certainly, they were interested from the point of view of curing of ailments and their illnesses and so on, was an obvious marketplace. And with a marketplace like that, snake oil salesmen appear, don't they? And their particular magic charm, whether it's Jesus or Zeus or whoever it is, he's the one, he does the magic, and you can see how it can get started. Now, okay, so you can start with something where, well, we don't really know. I would suggest it would probably be Syria, if anywhere. Doubtful it was Judea as such. It was probably Syria, where there's a lot more competition between different religious groups. So yes, somebody got started, and it became, I think, possible that you wrote something and then you ascribed it to this person who's got a bit of a reputation. This is how you present, and you write a small bit. It might simply be a single page or papyrus leaf indicating a curse or a blessing from whoever God you're practicing. So that's how the thing gets started. Now, after that, of course, you've got the whole needs of Christianity to get Paul to do the bits they need done. So, of course, you've got to have the spread of the faith. That's the real, the story is so attractive, so powerful that, unknown thousands flock to hear this magic word. A word comes out of Paul's mouth, everybody accepts it. Conversions all over the show. And so you have the first great myth created, that somehow this faith spread across the world. Instead of being just another, Mickey Mouse religion in the backwater of the Roman Empire, suddenly we have the pretense that it was instantly successful, instantly popular everywhere. And in fact, but if you take the real history of the Jews and how they reacted to Christianity, it was like, who on earth are these people? This is a load of garbage. We don't accept it. So, of course, the Jews are hard-hearted, aren't they? They won't accept any of this stuff. So, so he moves on to the more gullible pagans, who perhaps were not quite as canny as the Jews.
It's interesting what you're saying. I wanted to ask you, and I know there's no way to nail down all these, but in terms of dating Paul, how do you look at that? I mean, do you even try, or do you say, well, look, there could have been like, are there any that you think might be authentic, or you really not even really go into all that and just say, look, we don't even have authentics to begin with, and if there were authentics, they probably were embellished, because we have like hand downs, of these writings and rewrites of these writings. What are your thoughts on the dating of Paul? Because I know they say the 7 are in the 50s or 60s, and I'm like, I have a hard time, because even in the authentics in like 1 Thessalonians 4, you have Paul saying that the wrath of God is coming on the Jews. Like, he knows something he should not.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. I think that's a good giveaway to the fact it was post 70, post the ruination of Judaism. Yes, I think that's likely. I'm not hung up on dating the epistles. It's like as if it was Holy Grail. We've got a document, and it's really important, because I think they are all composite works that have been worked on over like 2 centuries at least before you get any hard copy that we have. They've been worked on, and quite when any of that material was put together, it's difficult to say. If you read some of the epistles, you know how they seem to reach a amen stage, and then they start off again, and it's as if, as it is, several shorter pieces have been stitched together. It's like there's stops and restarts to get the epistles of a length that, for me, proves without any contradiction, I think, they were never letters. They were never letters. They are religious expositions of a particular point of view, but no one popped them in the post and sent them off to here, there, and everywhere. You just have to think of, how does that happen then? How does that happen? How do they manage to get these? Sending an epistle to the whole world, or even to all the churches of Asia, or even to a church. How do you, wouldn't you have to say to the postman, take this document and deliver it to Jacob when you get to, Corinth or something? Wouldn't you have to say that? Wouldn't you have to give him specific directions as to finding these places? And what a heroic postman if he's going to follow around Paul's route and try and deliver a letter. Oh, I know he's gone off now, but here's his letter. To me, none of it hangs together. None of it hangs together.
You said something. I was going to say, you said something interesting about the whole, how you can see a development that, for example, we look at the epistles, right? And we see like 2 Peter, we know that's not written by Peter. Okay, and you talked about these forgeries being written in the name of. They did it because there's some possible guy at the root here that might be, his name might carry some value. There may be a Peter possibly. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there, but it's obvious people are writing forgeries of him. How do we know what the real guy even said if there was an original guy? To me, like, this is where it gets very complicated. But dealing with go ahead. I'm sure you wanted to say something on that.
No, I don't wish to interrupt, but you can see how what the truth is. There is a process of accretion of religious ideas. There's a debate going on as to what those ideas would be. Sometimes they're so poorly digested that they contradict something that appears a few pages earlier, but it's all put into the mix and it's worked on in different editions, and we eventually get to the stage where the church then endorses it. There is eventually a stage where the church endorses it. The bits that they don't want, they throw out, and they're heretical and not having those. But even within the body of material, it still is patchy. I've just recently reread Romans, Paul's epistle to the Romans. What a load of garbage. I mean, honestly, its language is so torturous. Into this idea of justification and righteousness and grace of God, and all these bits and pieces he throws in, and it's obviously in part of a debate that's going on within the church where it's trying to work out what it really believes. I mean, could Paul really have written all that material in the middle of the 1st century? There were no Gospels. He doesn't seem to know anything about the historical Jesus when he writes. So yet he comes out with all this theology, all this deep theology that centuries of churchmen pondered over.
Thank you. No, thank you. I must applaud you on that, because this gets to the, when you're trying to get to something and you're asking. Well, I was asking scholars. I've been doing this a lot. And I've had guys come on and go, I believe there was a historical Jesus, but Paul did some wackadoodle stuff with him, right? And then you got some guys who are like, well, we're not sure if there was. This is more reason for me to believe Jesus never existed, or the guy existed 100 years prior and somehow had enough time to develop something like this. Because I only say that because it's like, the complexity at which the Christology Paul brings. This guy only lived 20 years ago, and you're telling me there's this system of thought that is so encompassing this person, supposedly, that is just so rich that he's able to write all these letters about. He says he gets it from Revelation and from Scripture alone. He doesn't get it from any man.
Yep.
I mean, this is weird. This is weird,
Yeah, you're told in a very imprecise and vague way in which Paul is getting these communications from Jesus in heaven, and yet it's so comprehensive. You think, it's better than a VCR recording, isn't it? He's getting all this detailed information, from the Lord in heaven, and it's you have to start from that position of religious gullibility to even entertain it. Right. If we said this stuff about any other character apart from Jesus, yes, everybody would say, "Oh, that's rubbish." If you try and say this about Apollo or Dionysus, nobody would say, "Oh, yeah, well, you say that, but it's just not true." Yes, you're right. There's a richness, use that word, the Christians would like that. There's a richness about Paul's material that is way out of step with what is happening at that time. Let's take an example. Galatians. Who were the Galatians? Right, well, there's various theories about the Galatians. We know there's an area in central Anatolia called Galatia. Got its name originally from the Gauls that went that far. There's Galatia, and yet maybe he didn't go to Galatia proper, which is up by Ankara, that area, because Paul wasn't really in that area. They said you could have either the North Galatians or the South Galatians around a few Roman cities that were beyond the Taurus Mountains. Okay? Now, you think, okay, but we're talking tribesmen here, aren't we? We're talking tribesmen. They probably had their own unwritten, well, they did have their own unwritten language. Paul's writing in Greek, and he writes highbrow theology to new converts that he spent, a week, a day? I don't know how long he was there. He gave them a sermon. If you took the story literally, he gave them a sermon. They believed, right? He goes off, and then whatever it is, a week, a year later, a letter arrives of the greatest sort of detailed and torturous sort of theology, and that's supposed to be convincing. And not only did they have this document sent to them in a language they couldn't understand, they decided to preserve it, keep it, so that someone else a century later can collect it as one of Paul's epistles. He sent us this letter. At what point do you start saying, I'm not buying this? Yeah. This doesn't together.
Well, to step it further, because I don't know the geographic location or anything in terms of that. I'd love to research what you're talking here more, but to go further, he's also talking about Peter. And in this letter, he's James sending spies to spy out his freedom in Christ. How's that relevant to them? So you got to ask so many more questions, and there's more unanswerable things when you start becoming skeptical. That's what it started to do for me. Was it made me open up and it helped me knowing that we don't know, helped me realize no one knows. Like it's all you're making this thing make sense the best you can. And I think that's fascinating. And it's written in High Koine. It's like this isn't just regular common Greek. This is High Koine Greek being written in high theology. This is not basic stuff and it's very complex. His arguments are, very strange. He seems to spiritualize a lot of the Old Testament understanding of things too. It's like one place I had a rabbi on the show recently was talking about 1 Corinthians 9, where he quotes Deuteronomy 32 or something, where it talks about a law of God to Israel that you're supposed to not muzzle your oxen while it's working for you in the field. It needs to be allowed to eat whatever it wants to eat. And Paul goes, but is this not speaking of us, brethren? That God is, and then he goes right after that and does exactly what you said. He's like, and that you should bless me and, give us earthly things. While we give you heavenly things, we should deserve our wages. We're laboring like the oxen, and are you going to muzzle me? It's like, where did you get this in Deuteronomy? I don't understand, you spiritualist. He's like a Benny Hinn,
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, that parallel, of course, to a modern preacher is very relevant. It's the same sort of character. Now, I might be accused of being biased or cynical, but to me, these are charlatans out to make a quick buck out of people's gullibility. And con men have done that since the beginning of time, haven't they? You know, if you have a way of doing a little bit of so-called magic, and you don't let on the secret, you will fool people, and you can appeal to things that really matter to them, like someone they love is dying. Maybe they are dying. They know death is not far away. You are going to appeal to a real core value, core issue with them, and then you offer them something. Believe what I'm telling you, you are saved. You know, you don't have to prove it. They just have to believe it.
Did you ever hear about the temple priest? Not necessarily the Jewish ones, because I have no evidence of this on them, but this was known in these places like Ephesus and other places where the pagan temples, their priest would pay, and I can't remember the name of the guy. He was a Roman, I believe, and he was an engineer. He knew how to set stuff up where you would walk up to a temple door and it'd automatically open, or there would be moving objects, and they would think the gods were doing it. They tricked the common folk to throw their coin in that the god lives in this temple, and just very interesting kind of ways of tricking people, whether it was a temple, whether it was, the wine, water into wine, those type of things.
Yeah, it's absolutely. You're speaking of Hero or Heron.
Yes.
Of Alexandria. Yeah, I mean, he was an early scientist, and he worked out the harnessing of steam power. Yeah, and he used it to open temple doors, and But you see, you could do it today with somebody who's totally ignorant. You could show them a mobile phone and say, look, pictures, words, music. It's magic. It's my God doing that. And what other reference would they have? Yes. So you can use science to fool people, and I guess and sure. And the priests were among the first to latch onto these ideas. I mean, yeah, there's no doubt about that. And in fact, the Christians even acknowledge that, because when they would despoiling the pagan temples, they just loved to expose the false idols and the tricks they had. They didn't so long as they kept it away from their own door. Their own magic was sacrosanct, but these little tricks were and in many cases they've adopted them. Still happen today. You go to a ceremony, I think it's in Greece, where you can have a vial of blood, and on a magic day of the year it sort of goes from this solid to a liquid, and everyone's delighted by it. There's that every year at Easter in Jerusalem, you have holy fire, don't you? In the Church of the Sepulchre, Holy Sepulchre, they all gather, and sort of lights come down from the sky, and it's supposedly magical. It's supposedly magical, but not just someone lighting something and it all lights up, But people's desire to believe is very strong. Yeah. And I've got friends like that, as we all have. They like to tell me about, there's more mysteries than we understand, and it's all a bit hocus pocus. Yeah, I mean, you are fighting. We are all fighting this. The desire to make the universe conform to our ideas, but it doesn't.
Mary crying blood on these statues, and the cookie of Jesus, or the cracker of Jesus with the red, it's turning into him. And yeah, so I agree, this is all superstition. It's maybe pulled some people through some hard times, I get it, but I think it's done overall, as I just recently interviewed yesterday Aaron Ra, I think that's how he likes me to pronounce his name, and he was like, it's done more harm though than it's done good. If we had moved a little past this, we would be in a better place scientifically. I think universally as humans, dividing each other over what you think about a god or a theology, it's like, this is absurd. I used to be that way. Trust me, I'm 100% can vouch what it did in my mind and how I thought I was superior in my belief system than other Christians. We aren't even talking about the ones that are completely lost, okay? We're just talking about the guys who are supposed to be my brothers, and it's like, oh gosh, I'm so glad I escaped that box. So I want to go back to Paul for our audience's sake, because a lot of people are going to enjoy this discussion, but tell us some weird stuff about, like, what is some, like, red flags that you found out? I mean, example, Paul is on a ship headed to Rome and a shipwreck happens, or, like, let's talk about some funny stuff.
Well, this is his famous voyage to Rome, isn't it? I mean, for a start, it's very, very curious how he even gets to Rome, right? Because there is a theological need for him to go to Rome. Jesus has told him he's going to testify in Rome for him. So the story writer's got to get him to Rome. Now, there's a really weird bit here, because he eventually, after he causes a riot in Jerusalem, and the Romans, a whole cohort of Romans, rescue him and take him down to their capital, Caesarea. They take him down there, and he's in jail. Yeah, he's put in jail. He's waiting for somebody to come from Jerusalem, but this guy never comes. So Paul is left in jail for 2 years. But then a new governor comes, and he decides to put Paul in front of Herod, King Herod, and this is Herod II, and he says to him, I can't see any reason why we've got you here, but Paul, basically says, I appeal to Caesar, and then this convenient King Herod says, oh, well, as he's appealed to Caesar, there's really nothing we can do. He's got to go to Rome now. And you think, well, hang on. This is a king, and a local king and the local governor, and they couldn't just say to Paul, well, there's nothing to answer for. Let him out, send him on his way. No, he's got to go to Rome now. So, that's a sort of a mismatch of logic. You can't imagine a situation where a tough guy, a tough guy like the provincial governor of Judea, feels like, oh, he's uttered the magic words, appear before Caesar. I can't do a thing now. It's out of my hands. I mean, that is just not plausible. Just not plausible. Then he gets put on the boat with 276 other people, as far as I know, I can recall, and off he goes to Rome. But the boat, gets into a storm. Now, this storm lasts an unimaginable 2 weeks, I think it is. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. They're lost in a storm on the Adriatic. They're 2 weeks. And who takes charge? Well, ultimately, Paul. Paul takes charge. He's a prisoner, but he takes charge. He forbids them to launch the lifeboat. He forbids them to launch the lifeboat. They don't launch the lifeboat, right? And the ship eventually gets stranded on an island, which by tradition is identified as Malta. And, and so they all get saved, and they're all ashore. And then we get another little episode. Paul gets bitten by a snake, right? Gets bitten by a snake. But this deadly snake has no effect on Paul, right? Another proof that he's got, he's working for the correct God. And this is an island which his, from archaeobiologists tell us, it's never had poisonous snakes, but we have to make an exception that on this occasion there were poison snakes, and so it goes on each particular little episode, and unfortunately or fortunately, depending how you look at it, the gospel or the Gospels or the New Testament never spends more than 2 or 3 lines on any of these little things. It's an economy of story writing. It's very, very succinct to the point of absurdity. But so then when the weather breaks, they set off for Rome. Now, interesting. If you look at that whole episode of going into Rome, what is it exactly? Well, it's the culmination of Paul in chains being taken to prison for to appear before Caesar, but also a grandee of the church arriving in grand style. When they arrive at the Port of Puteoli, brethren magically appear and ask you to stay with them for a week. And you think, where's that come from then? both the strange appearance of Christians and the fact that now they're going to take, having spent, I think it's 2 months, 3 months on Malta, they're going to now take another week's holiday. And how